ELI 5. Military officers swear to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, not the President. Can the military overthrow the President if there is a direct order that may harm civilians? A lot of the Constitution is set up to protect the peaceful transfer of power. Basically, the only way the government should ever change hands is through different candidates winning elections. So while the armed forces swear to the Constitution, not the President, the Constitution itself includes a couple of methods, impeachment and the 25th Amendment, by which a bad, crazy, sick etc. president can be removed and replaced. Ideally, this would remove the need for the army to overthrow the president, because the other parts of our government, legislature and judiciary, could handle it. The problem with the armed forces doing it is that A, it's not a peaceful transfer of power, and B, the armed forces are now in charge of the government, which is bad. Having the military swear to the Constitution also serves another purpose, which is to separate them from the president, even though he's the commander-in-chief. One important move that Hitler made when he came to power was to have the military stop pledging to serve Germany and start pledging to him personally. His hope was that their loyalty to him would lead them to follow his orders even if they were harmful to the nation or its citizens. This fear goes back at least as far as ancient Rome, when, for example, Julius Caesar was able to become emperor-dictator because he had a large army of soldiers who were loyal to him personally, rather than to the Roman Republic. Edit, thank you for the gold. And thanks to those who are correcting and refining my history. This was all off the top of my head, so there were bound to be mistakes. In theory, military commanders are supposed to disobey an order that is unconstitutional, no need for a coup. In theory. Of course, if said commanders back the president anyway, that won't make any difference, and it's not as if there's anyone else in a position to stop the military. This is the problem with a standing army, one which the US, in its early history, actively tried to avoid, hence the Second Amendment, which speaks of the need for a well-regulated militia. You should probably cross your fingers and hope we never have to find out. Suppose the president suddenly announces that all presidential elections are cancelled, and that he is president for life. A blatantly illegal and unconstitutional act. What could happen? Well, if things work correctly, either Congress or the Supreme Court, or both, will put a stop to that. For example, Congress could impeach the president, effectively putting him on trial, and if found guilty, removing him from office. But what if things go really horribly wrong? Perhaps Congress refuses to impeach. Maybe the president and those around him have been using personal and direct threats against congressmen and their families. Hitler did something similar to ensure his rise to the top. For whatever reason, that mechanism has broken down, and those few brave souls who dare speak out are silenced, perhaps arrested or simply dismissed. Can the military stage a coup? To be honest, if things have got to that stage, then the rule of law has irretrievably broken down anyhow. Doing nothing at all would simply allow the totalitarian dictatorship to establish itself. And I would imagine an awful lot of civil unrest, as civilians opposed to the president protest and are met with those sympathetic to him, and that might be serious enough for the military to impose martial law simply to restore some kind of order. But here we're talking about a military coup, and military coups are not often good news. If you're lucky, a military coup might succeed in removing the dictatorship and returning the country to civilian rule as quickly and painlessly as possible. If you're unlucky, a military coup simply replaces a civilian dictatorship with a military dictatorship. U.S. Army officer here. It's as simple as it sounds, but at the same time quite brilliant. Our oath is different than the enlisted soldiers, the actual fighters, in that obeying orders is not part of our oath. We are only required to use the Constitution and our principles as a guide when deciding if we should follow an order. By virtue of how the oath is written, we swear to place the Constitution above the president. This is designed to prevent the president from being able to subvert the Constitution via the military. The reality that an order may not be followed by subordinate officers is a form of checks and balances that is designed to prevent tyrannical, unethical, or just plain dumb efforts from getting off the ground. What makes it brilliant is that the US military learned long ago that decentralized execution, meaning empowering subordinates to make decisions, works very well in combat situations as well as operational design, and our central leaders are willing to accept the risk that comes along with that approach. Of note, enlisted soldiers have an obligation not to obey unlawful orders, which makes them accountable for their actions. But officers have an obligation to disobey even those that could be classified as lawful orders if it violates the aforementioned criteria. Most people who have never served in the armed forces, the vast majority of the present population of adult Americans, have no idea how strongly our veterans feel about the oath of enlistment or oath of commission that they took when they joined our armed forces. I am 66 years old. When I was a boy, virtually all adult men were veterans of World War II or the Korean War. Those veterans all shared a common military experience. They were patriotic and they expected certain behavior and attitudes out of other adults. With the upheavals associated with the Vietnam War and the cessation of the draft in 1972, this is no longer the case. Most adults today do not consider our armed forces to be part and parcel of the civilian population and have never served as a soldier. They do not understand, because they never experienced military boot camp and training, that our servicemen and servicewomen are taught that they are to defend the Constitution. Most of us cannot imagine a situation where a tyrant might attempt to seize control of the United States. Conditioned by a recent history of presidents who attempt to do as they please through executive orders, many people believe the power of the president is not checked by Congress or the Supreme Court. This is not the case, and don't think for a second that the men and women of our armed forces are not acutely aware of this fact. As a young Marine sergeant, I saw teenaged Marines outraged and offended when they believed General Haig, the Secretary of State at that time, was trying to take control of the government when President Ronald Reagan was shot. They were shouting, "He's not next in the line of succession. It's the vice president." Haig later apologized, but as a general officer and the Secretary of State, for Pete's sake, he should have known better. This little story is exactly why we need to continue to teach civics and government in high school. Americans should trust their armed forces more. Soldiers are citizens, not robots. In my opinion, the Republic is in no danger from its armed forces. Plus, the civilian population is armed to the teeth with 300 million firearms. If you look at it objectively, the military could easily overthrow the civilian government and install its own leader. We have the monopoly on weaponry. It happens in other countries. However, our democracy is safeguarded from this by several things. Some folks may not realize this, but one of the reasons we have ROTC on college campuses is to ensure that future military leaders will always have a connection to the general public. This is to balance the effects of a dedicated military academy, by its makeup, tends to lean more tribal. Also, we also have another safeguard by maintaining separate branches of the armed forces instead of having a unified military command. In the Third World, it is quite common to have one branch side with the government while another sides with the rebels. Checks and balances, if you will.